Hey, how we doing, guys? Thanks so much for joining. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to move the mop out of the way. Yeah, thanks so much for joining, everyone. The second one, if you like, in a week. So I'll just get straight into it and just get started with a couple of the questions that were asked previously. The first one, which was asked, was what was my study technique during the ATPLs? So that's a really good question, actually. It's difficult to give a study technique as such. It was more kind of like what I did to get into my own rhythm. What was the thing that I did? I basically would set my day up initially to say, okay, fine, if it was a working day, I'd set my alarm pretty early in the morning and then get up. And what I'll do is I'll split the time up basically to do like half an hour to 45-minute bursts of study. And what I'd say to myself is I'll just find a quiet area. I'll then go straight in, do my study, and I'll just turn everything off. So there will be no music, no phone, no nothing for 30 or 45 minutes, do the phase of study that I needed to do, and then give myself like a 5-minute break or 5-minute reward. And then that way, it allowed myself basically to keep, to stay focused during the time without too many, without kind of drifting along. I guess the other one just on like study is make sure you have regular breaks. Because that's also quite important. Because if you kind of saturate yourself, it's then less likely that you're going to be able to keep going and get the study that you needed. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. By the way, everyone new to the stream, thanks for coming. Please make sure you subscribe and like the channel if it is your first time. So the next question, which I was asked, was which MCC course did I do and why? So I did a video actually, which is pretty well documented on the channel, that talking about the MCC decision that I went for and why. I guess the first parameter that one needs to be looking at really is kind of which MCC courses are people landing jobs from and why, and do the airlines have a preference on that particular MCC? Hey James, how you doing, guys? If you've got any questions, please just ask them on the live chat, and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. So which MCC course and why? So it was basically at the time I was looking around trying to figure out where I was going to go, and initially what I was finding is you basically had 3 levels of MCC course. There was if you like, just the standard MCC, which was like a 20-hour course on a generic device, not particularly tailored to anyone. And then you also had a 40, well, not 40, I think it was like a 36-hour MCC course at the time. And that was typically the standard. It was just then called an MCC jock. And then the final part you had was an MCC course, which the school or whoever it is that you went with agreed that they would place you with an airline. Which were all great. And initially I thought, well, the problem with going with a school that places you with an airline is that there wasn't a guarantee at the time that they would do it. For example, the school could say, oh, your performance wasn't particularly good in the MCC course, so we're not going to place you with anybody. So basically, I went through that and I thought, well, I don't really fancy just paying top money to go to a school that's supposed to place you, and then you find that you're sat in a whole pool. They find an excuse not to. And at the time, the APS MCC then came out with certain airlines being favoring that particular MCC product. And then the other driver for me was for the MCC product to also hopefully help me on my type rating. So it was like a double win. So I went for the APS MCC, which was done on the 737-800 platform. And then that also gave me, if you like, the shortcuts during the type rating. So I hope that just gives you a little bit of flavor as to which MCC. Hey, Joe, thanks for signing on. What's day-to-day work like? Fun, stressful, tiring? Yeah, good question. So in my particular company, the roster is split. You do 5 days on, and then you have 4 days off. And you start with an early or late, so you do 5 days of earlies, and then you have 4 days off, and then you do 5 days of late, and then you have 4 days off. So the earlies can be quite challenging initially when your body is maybe not quite used to it and you're adapting. But I guess I've probably been like the excited child when the alarm goes off. I'm thinking, well, I'd rather stay in bed, but then I think, hang on, I get to go flying today. So yeah, let's do it. In terms of what the day-to-day is, the day-to-day normally starts with getting over to the airport, getting into the crew room. The normal practice is the first officer typically gets there earlier than the captain, basically, to get the paperwork ready. The target time, the latest you can be in the crew room is 45 minutes before the departure. But if you're new, then you normally try to get there a bit early because you don't want to start annoying the captain quite early on. You then look at the paperwork, you check the flight plans, check the weather, check the NOTAMs, have a look at where it is that we're going and so on. And then, just basically get into the rhythm, sort all the paperwork out. So hopefully once the captain arrives, you're on page and you both. And it's pretty much straightforward. It's hello, how are you doing? Yeah, catch up. And then it's right, have you looked at everything? Yeah, are you happy? And then make a fuel decision. Once that's done, ring fuel through, and then you then go and meet your crew for the cabin crew for the day that you're working with. And this is like quite a nice bonding time. Then figure out certain parameters. For example, will there be a password for the day and what the password will be if they need to talk to you for whatever reason. And then it's straight out to the aircraft. Depending on whether it's a 2 or 4 sector day, 2 sector days are pretty, are a pleasant place, particularly when the weather's good everywhere. 4 sector days are a little bit more demanding, but you very quickly get the match fitness in you, and it becomes actually quite reasonable and quite a decent day. And then it's actually a really, really good experience. And then it's just perhaps from time to time when the weather's bad, it can be a little bit challenging. So for example, if there's widespread fog in a particular area, then it makes alternate selection and fuel decisions that much more critical and so on. And then it becomes a bit more hard work, but 99% of the time it's great. Joe, I hope that answered your question. Tabo, how are you doing? So the question reads, as a modular trained pilot, did you do all your training with one training organization? Yeah, great question, Tabo. So guys, first of all, the new people on the channel, thank you so much for subscribing and liking the page. If you haven't already, please do so. So I didn't do all my training with one organization. No, that's if you like the nice part of modular training is you can pick and choose. So I did my PPL with one company, and then did a little bit of flying, but then I was in a full-time job at this time, and I was basically just getting into the job. I wasn't, I wanted to go flying, but at the time the airline industry wasn't particularly good. It was around about 2009, 2010 time. So I wasn't in a big rush. I was in a comfortable, stable job. Things were working out, so I wasn't particularly keen. I was keen, but I didn't feel the need to kind of upset the balance of how things were at the time. And then subsequently to that, when I later decided a number of years later that I wanted to go flying, the first thing was to get my PPL revalidated, then start hour building. So ANT in Blackpool were fantastic. They helped me tremendously. James and Ross and the guys are phenomenal to do my hour building. And with them, I did my restricted instrument rating. I then started my ground school whilst I was doing my my hour building. Again, that was with a different company, Tabo. And then moved on to the CPL and IR courses, again, both different companies. And then finally the APS MCC, which was also a different company. It was completely fine. I mean, what's good is, the training records were fairly good. The standard of training was good. So no, I didn't have any issues on that. And then I guess the last part is, do airlines look at you differently if you've trained with more than one provider? It depends. I mean, certain airlines will have a preference for which schools they will recruit to. But other airlines are pretty relaxed. And in fact, most are coming around to that way of thinking now, where they're not so concerned about which school you went to or how you went to or what you did. I hope that answers that question there, Tabo. Guys, if you've got any questions, please keep them coming. I'll try my best to get to them. So another question which came through was how to prepare for a competency-based interview. So this is quite an interesting one, and maybe pilots are so focused on can I fly a raw data approach? I need to have a good hold. I need to do this. I need to do that, and so on and so forth. which is fine. But the airline assessments are normally split into a number of different areas. So a typical airline assessment will normally have online testing or pre-screening before you get to the airline assessment. And there's certain things that you can do for that. There's certain companies that have exercises that you can practice. But I guess you can't practice everything. Some of it, they are genuinely testing what your reaction speeds are and so on and so forth. So some you can practice, but there's not a great deal that you can, if you like, to prepare. So once you've gone past that stage, you then get to the airline interview, and it's normally split up into a number of parts for a given day. So you start off perhaps with a group exercise. And in there, they're looking at how you work with other people. Do you show enough leadership? Are you assertive in the right areas? Do you pipe up? Are you laissez-faire? Do you get involved? And so on and so forth. And for the group exercises, I guess it's, if you think to yourself, how would I like to be in the flight deck, and try and work on those principles, your leadership and teamwork, your organization and prioritization, involving the quieter ones within the group. That certainly helps to try to, if you like, to smooth that portion or that side of things out. Then you move on to an HR interview. And this is where they're really looking at your competencies. So show me a time when you led through initiative. Show me a time where you dealt with a complex problem. Tell me about a time when you did X, Y, and Z. So there was a great book that I read on Read, which was based on the 101 interview questions that could potentially come up. Once I've done this stream, what I'll do is I'll include a link to this book, and that helped a lot just in terms of the psychology that's best to apply. Now, there's no doubt a lot of you guys on the call are super talented and you've got a lot of ability and have a lot of action. But what's difficult sometimes is getting the delivery right and trying to figure out what is essentially being asked and what people are trying to get at. So, for example, for me, I used to think, go to a job interview, it's really important to tell everybody what you have and what you can do, which is great. But you have to treat a job interview as really an employer having a problem and the employer wanting the problem to be solved. And that's what the job interview is. So from the competency-based, I think you have to kind of switch the roles around. Rather than just telling them what you can do or what you're capable of, start to work on the basis of how can I demonstrate that I can solve this problem? So if, for example, the job is, let's say, to be a pilot, then from a competency-based interview, they might be like, hey, tell us of a time when you had to solve a complex problem. Well, within that, you can include examples of being able to work under pressure. Again, that gives the interviewer the example that, yeah, you can do it. Give examples of how you can involve others within the group. And again, that will give the interviewer the warm fuzzy that, okay, cool. Give an interview examples of when you've worked with procedures. So yeah, try and kind of spin it around to work on that basis. But I would say, yeah, the bulk of the competency interview is just prep. Within this book, it gives an example of basically sitting there in front of the mirror and just practicing the type of questions that they could potentially throw at you. So yeah, I hope that answers that question for the competency-based interview. So another question that came up that's often been asked is, how realistic is it for me to do my Atpl exams whilst I have a full-time job? So I did a video on this, and that was basically, it's driven by you and your willingness to work and your willingness to get into a rhythm. So I guess the key part is get into a rhythm, do what you need to do, and then just try and stick to that rhythm and not sway from that rhythm. Keep yourself motivated, make sure you have enough breaks and so on and so forth, and then go from there. So another question, James, do you ever fly hand visual approaches in the 737? So yes and no. Good question for you, James. So we do fly visual approaches, but they're not in the raw sense as you would, where everything is switched off and then you're merely just basing it on hand-eye and coordination. The reason for that is we don't want the aircraft to get into an undesirable state and to get overloaded. If I just step back a little bit, most of the approaches that are flown by pilots today are merely ILS approaches. So it is a threat that, given that you'd be doing ILS or RNAV approaches the majority of your time, it's one of the risks that we don't want to just switch everything off and then go in and start flying manually and hand flying for obvious reasons. So when we do fly visual approaches, there's certain criteria that needs to be met in terms of first of all, briefing it beforehand, and there's a certain type of briefing that we would do. Are we doing on that? And then the other thing that we'd normally do is for visual approach, if we're genuinely flying a visual approach, maybe to save time or whatever, would normally overlay a previous approach that already exists on there, because let's say an ILS has been well designed, it gives you good terrain separation and so on and so forth. So we'll normally overlay that and then still use the various lateral and vertical guidance tools on the aircraft to give us some direction, and also make sure that we're arriving in the aircraft at the final approach point basically in a decent energy state, rather than excessively fast or excessively high or excessively low. As you'll appreciate, that visual approaches, if you haven't been practicing regularly, can cause difficulty. So I hope that answers that question, James. Is it still following instrument rules? Yeah, absolutely. So in my company, it's not the same in every company, but in my company, all commercial flights have to be flown under IFR. Some airports only have one ILS at one end, e.g. Blackpool. So how would you operate onto runway 10? Yeah, it's a good question. So we do fly circling approaches, so we can fly the ILS, for example, hypothetically speaking, fly down the ILS in runway 2A to a circling height, then break off, and then do a circling procedure to come back around on ourselves. That's perfectly fine, and that's perfectly valid on there. Guys, keep the questions coming. Cheers for that, James. So another question here that we had from another user is what to expect from the type rating. So yeah, that was a good question. So for the type rating, really, it's quite intense, but it can also be quite an enjoyable experience. So it starts off with you start off with an induction, basically, just talking you through various topics, for example, CRM, and then you'll also do some of your health and safety and training, also fire training and so on. Then within my company, you get sent away for a couple of weeks to go and study, to basically get through the e-learning. There's a lot of e-learning that you do, and also get ready theoretically in terms of studying all the procedures, all the flight manuals, and so on and so forth. And then after that, you then come back. You then have a little bit of brush up, and then you'd be straight into your exams, examining all the different aircraft systems in quite some detail that you've learned. And then from there, you then look at some of the other factors associated with the aircraft, with operating the aircraft. So, for example, you'd look at performance, you'd look at mass and balance, and all these sort of things, and get you used to operating or doing all the rigid, if you like, parts of the preparation to go flying on any given day. And from that point, then you then straight into your simulator sessions. Initially, you start off on the fixed-base sim, and then from the fixed-base sim, you then move on to the full flight sim. They ramp up quite gently and then quite nice, and the idea is to not kind of shock you, but to give you an opportunity to follow the learning curve as it is, but also give you plenty of time for consolidation and for, if you like, getting your head into the type rating. And then from there, you're then into the full flight sim. So the difference between the fixed base sim and the full flight sim, the fixed base sim is basically for you to practice your procedures and get to grips with your procedures. The full flight sim is accepting that you've got your procedures laid, and then that's really teaching you or finessing your aircraft handling. It is often, a lot of people say that Cat D level sims are near enough the aircraft. They've got a lot of, the majority of the aircraft are, the majority of the components within the sim are from the real aircraft, and the realism is pretty accurate. The only thing that you don't get within the sim is G, but in terms of the operation, that's it's near enough identical on there. Guys, keep the question coming. So another question that popped up was with regards to COVID-19. What do we think of the state? What do we think the state of the industry will be after COVID-19? So yeah, good question. It's quite a difficult one to kind of tell, because truthfully, nobody really knows. I guess we can only work on the things that we can control. And I guess it's all driven down to once governments start to open up, aviation again effectively for normal traffic. Hopefully, it should start to pick up once again. Guys, anyone that's new to the page, thank you so much for joining. If you like the content, please like the page, and also please do subscribe. Please definitely keep the questions coming in. So another question I've got here is, how did I find the IR, and is there anything that can be done in advance to get ready for the IR? So yeah, I did a little video on this actually. So guys, please feel free to have a look on there. So in terms of preparing for the IR, it's quite difficult really, because I guess, the first one is you're not really qualified to fly in instrument conditions unless you've got a restricted IR, which I'll come to shortly. So there isn't a great deal that you can prep. What you can do though is try to fly accurately wherever you can. So if you're doing your hour building, you're going across to wherever, pick an altitude, try and stick to it, try and work on those tolerances, really work on flying your headings and so on, because that basically forms the basis of your IR, and try to be as disciplined, as much as you can. It's always worth, with going over your previous notes, maybe PPL and so on and so forth, just to try to, if you like, get up to speed with the IR itself. Once you're on the IR, there's a number of things that you can do. So, for example, cockpit organization is pretty key in the IR. So finding a way to manage all your plates, get a decent kneeboard that works well for you. It may not necessarily be that you decide to go with paper plates. For example, as I mentioned previously, I got the Jet subscription, went with all the Jet plates, and then that made it a lot easier because, for example, the night before, I didn't have to go around and worry about making sure my plates were up to date. All I'd have to do is just go on my iPad, update everything, and go from there. But the only thing is, it is quite expensive. You have to pay for the iPad, and then you have to then also pay for the subscription. And in my case, I used 4Flight. So that's kind of how I did it. And then once you get into your lessons, try to be prepared as you can, or go over and seat fly and chair fly the night before what you're going to be doing, your checks and so on. So it just becomes quite automatic and quite and it opens up some of the capacity elements of things for you, so you're not kind of going into a procedure and thinking, right, what my approach checks again, what's coming next. It all becomes a little more fluid. On the day, get there early, so if the schedule changes or the flight school schedule changes, you're then in a position to take advantage of it. Within the flying phase, I forgot to mention, it's pretty important that you get some sleep, good night's sleep, because it's going to be pretty demanding phase of flying for what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. Afterwards, when you come back, it's always great when you can, if you can backseat other people's flying. That used to help a lot, because when you backseat other people's flights and also sim sessions, you're not so engrossed in the operation, so you can take a step back and see where other people are making the mistakes and maybe how they could manage their time better. Could a radio call have been delayed, for example, to get some checks done? Or, for example, on departure, after departure, can you pre-select your frequencies so you just straight over that sort of thing? Flight sim helps a lot as well on that. As you go through your IR course, the other thing to help to get through it is don't rush it. It's always a big race. I made the same mistake. I was desperate to get into the aircraft, but take your time during the sim sessions, because during the sim, it's cheaper. A sim is 100, 150 or 200 pounds an hour. So it's better to spend that rather than to spend it in an aircraft, which is now 500 or 550 an hour, and you can't pause an aircraft as well. So guys, do as much as you can in the sim. So it just makes getting into the aircraft that much more fluid. So I've got another question here from Joe. How often were your lessons for CPL MEIR? So yeah, on CPL, because I was doing it part-time, it was basically each Sunday would be dedicated to CPL flying. So I normally have 2 lessons in a day. In the morning, it would be a longer lesson, maybe last hour and a half to 2 hours, maybe a bit more. And we'll normally do the nav part of the lesson in the morning, do route diversion and so on and so forth. And then in the afternoon would normally be general handling for the CPL. And that was probably the maximum I could do. Yeah, as I say, an hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning, and then maybe an hour later on in the afternoon. For MEIR, initially when I was in the sim, my Saturdays were dedicated to IR, and I'd normally book 2 sim sessions and it'll be maybe an hour, 15 hour and 20 hour and a half in each one. Fly in the morning, have a break, think about it, and then go back again in the afternoon. Once you got to the aircraft stage, probably about an hour, one lesson a day was about the maximum. You can do more, but the problem with IR is you start to max out quite quickly. And certainly on the odd day where I insisted on doing 2 lessons, I felt that the learning value on the second part of the lesson was maybe lost just because you're completely maxed out and you're struggling to take things in. It's not quite that important. And do you think doing it whilst working full-time will cause problems retaining skills between lessons? So the really important one is to fly minimum once a week. And that was enough for me. But what I would say is, as I got towards the end of the course and I was doing the 15 hours in the aircraft, it then became I tried to be much more frequent. So I basically figured out that, you needed to be flying every 2 to 3, maximum 4 days to keep the level of feel and fluidity within the aircraft, if that helps. So as I got closer to the test, I was taking more days off and certainly doing more during the week just to keep you. With IR, it's ridiculous. I mean, you don't fly for a week, and then you really, really do feel the difference. So I hope that answers the question in terms of maintaining the skills. At the start, once a week was enough for me, but then towards the end, it certainly became a lot more important to try and sharpen up. Right, guys, got another question from here. So, that was it. It was a good question, which was asked is, should we, the thoughts on doing competency-based IR versus the full fat IR. So it largely depends on you as a person and what your abilities are and so forth. So in the UK, you've got this shortcut, which is the IMC rating. And that allows you to go on to a competency-based IR rather than a full IR. And the competency-based IR route was brought in for pilots who had a lot of experience in IMC, but did not necessarily have the license to be able to operate within Europe and the UK to do that. So for the competency-based IR, it's great and it's a great rating and it's all well doing that. But the only thing you have to recognize is you have to actually turn up with the competency, as I said inside the video. So if you've been doing a lot of IMC work, great. In the run-up to your IR, fantastic. Competency-based route will work for you because you can pick it up and expand on your skills. But if you did an IMC rating, let's say, 3 years ago, and then you've flown maybe an hour IMC or 2 hours IMC in the last 12 months and expect to go into a competency-based IR, well, you'll probably be in for a shock. You'll probably be much better off just hanging back and doing just the full IR. The reason for that is because the full IR is approved training. So there'll be a dedicated path and route for each lesson for you to go through. Whereas the competency-based IR is kind of more figuring out and assessing where your gaps are, working on those gaps, and then getting you with a view to just doing the minimum to get through. So I hope that answers that question. The other question that came up is, and again, it's been coming up a lot, is, am I better off doing my CPL-IR inside the UK, or should I be going elsewhere? Will the various airlines look at it differently? The truth is, all flight schools, if provided the training is to a good standard, should give you no difficulty within finding a job. I guess it's more important that you make sure that the quality of the training is good, and also see what kind of places people are getting jobs at with the various airlines. And again, so I'd say no, it doesn't really make a difference where you go. On my type rating, there were people from a number of, some have done training in the UK, some in Poland, some in Spain, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't really a problem at all. So absolutely. Guys, anyone new signing up, thank you so much for signing on, getting onto the stream. If you like the content, please like the page and don't forget to subscribe. So you mentioned you use a home flight sim, perhaps a later video. What have you found the key benefits of training rather than just a game? Yeah, good question, James. So the main one is you can kind of pre-walk through what you are going to be doing. So all phases of my training, both at IR and then later getting ready for airline assessments and so on. I was on the sim, and the great thing of the sim is, although it's not exactly the aircraft, absolutely not, but you can practice like going into holds and then getting your stopwatch go, and then 30 to go, 60 to go, all these sort of things, and then making sure you're tracking the inbound course to be within 5 degrees. Again, with the tools that I had, Flight Sim matched up with the G1000 on the iPad, and then a DA42 for the IR was absolutely brilliant. And you could really hone your skills. You could put crazy winds on and then see what your wind correction angle was like, and whether that was the right thing or not. And yeah, absolutely, it made a huge difference. It wasn't flying the aircraft, absolutely not, but in terms of getting your procedures, in terms of getting your calls, right, we're going beacon outbound now, make your call to ATC, do our checks, do the briefing. All right, we're about to turn inbound now. Where's the wind coming from? What does 30 to go look like? What does 60 to go look like? And so on and so forth. And then the other thing also, which helped me, was getting into the rhythm of the scan. So in my flight school, on the IR, in the sim it was steam gauges, but then in the aircraft it was G1000. So it didn't take long, but it took a little bit of time just getting used to where to find the information on the G1000. So that also helps at home. And then also, for those of you that will be working on a G1000, there's a lot of really good online learning courses there that you can do that will help you. I did those and they were absolutely fantastic. And it just means you can use the aircraft or spend the time in the aircraft a little bit more effectively, but also you can make the systems work and dance for you and give you certain information. Please don't, and I'm not suggesting you go into your IR test and hope to fly your ILS with the autopilot on in approach mode. The examiner just won't let you do that. You'll just pull the circuit breaker and fail the autopilot on you and expect you to hand fly it. But there's certain things that you can do to just make life a little bit easier for yourself in terms of route planning, how you represent the information. So if you're going into a hold, calculating your drift, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I hope that answers that question, James, for you. Guys, please keep the questions coming. Anything you'd like to know, anything you'd like to ask on the flight training front, please just shout. Another question that came up earlier, someone else sent me, was they were like, hey, I've been out of training for a good while because for whatever reason I just haven't got into it. Is it worth going back and redoing an MCC course or an MCC type product if you don't already have it? And now I had a good friend of mine, actually. He now works in the same company as me. And in fact, we got our jobs within a week of each other. And he'd done his training, and he'd been out for about 12, 18 months. And what he came back and done was he initially just done a base MCC course, but he came back and redid an APS MCC, and that opened the door for him to get back into the flying game. So it certainly does help, and it's a really good thing. So another question, how much does it cost to go in the sim for the MEIR? Yeah, good question. So it just depends. It's around about sort of 170 to about 200, 250 an hour, something like that. But it's a lot less than paying 500 or 550 quid an hour for the aircraft. It just varies depending on the school. And do you save a lot of money by doing as much of the course in the sim? Yeah, definitely. The nice thing of the sim is it can be paused. And if something isn't quite working out, you can just put your hand up and say, look, I've lost it. Can we go back and do that again? Whereas in the airplane, it's a little bit more difficult just because it's so expensive and you are now flying in real time in controlled airspace. And a lot of time with other aircraft and other airlines operating within you. So I did my IR in Leeds, and Leeds is a big international, well, it's not big, it's a reasonable size international airport. So you are being fitted in around the traffic. So you can't just say, to practice today, I would like to do a direct entry hold, because you may not get it. ATC may vect you one way or another and then come back in and you have to do a teardrop and so on and so forth. So yeah, doing as much in the sim as possible is great, but you also have to be comfortable in the aircraft. And also don't be afraid, if you're now in the aircraft and something hasn't quite worked out, to go back into the sim, because again, maybe holding the ILS is not quite there. Do it in the sim because it costs a lot less, and you'll be able to do it over and over and over and over again. Whereas practicing ILS in the aircraft, you have to fly the approach, go around, vectors round, come back, and then do it again. So yeah, that can be a little bit more crisp way of doing it. Guys, thank you so much for joining the channel. Please, if you've got any questions, please keep them coming. Please shout if there's anything you would like to know. Another question here that I had, somebody asked me was, which school should I go for my ATPL ground school, which actually led to the video coming on. If you're doing a distance learning, I think you have to assess yourself as an individual and figure out what works best for you. There isn't one school that's guaranteed to get you every success. I guess it's important to kind of look at all the different elements. So, all right, for school A, how do they structure the course? Is it based on 3 modules or 4 modules? And how long are people typically taking? Can you afford to give that level of commitment to it? The next question that you want to be asking is, what's the material like, and what's the feedback from other students who've been on the course? Is it good feedback? Is it bad feedback? And then ultimately, it's a compromise to try and find the best sort of solution that works best for you and for the situation that you're in. So for me, what was important was to pick a course that wasn't too heavy on the brush-ups, just because I didn't have a lot of time off work and I need to save my holidays for later on. But then I was working in a technical background as well. So I was relatively confident that the mathematics side of things and the applied maths of things shouldn't be too tricky. But other people who've maybe been working in other fields that are non-technical, they may prefer to have or look at the option to have a school or a school that provides a little bit more in terms of brush up, just to allow you to get over the line. The really important thing is not to rush it and try not to rush your exams either and get up in this situation where potentially you've got retakes and so on and so forth, rather than just spending an extra 4 or 5 weeks and delaying your exams to hopefully get through. So the next, another one of the questions that came up was, how do I prepare for the online testing that the airlines give? So I mentioned earlier that there's a number of forums online, well, not forums, but companies online that give you a little bit of prep to be able to practice some of the exercises. In limited cases, you can. I mean, there's a famous NDB exercise with the RBI where you have to show where you are in relation to the NDB. Something like that works quite well. You can do that. But then there are other parts where it's a genuine test of your ability. So, for example, reaction time, critical thinking, and so on and so forth. It's difficult to really practice this. What you certainly can do in cases where airlines are asking ATPL questions as part of their online training is you can go through your ATPL material. There's various books that give you the practice, and if you like a quick summary of all the information, you can go back to your question bank and so on. So that's how you prepare for those. So a question here, thanks, do you have any idea of the representation of Black and ethnic minority women who fly for my company? I think from what I found, I think my company have been brilliant in that. I guess like everyone else, really, there's a big push to try and encourage more women to get into the airline industry. And it's good within my crew room, for example. There's some great ladies, some great pilots in there also. So it's good, but unfortunately, just with the numbers that are coming in, there's not that many ethnic guys or girls that are coming through the training. So unfortunately, the numbers aren't quite there on the other side. But it's one area that certainly all the airlines are pushing for. The airlines have been fantastic in that they almost want, or not to discriminate, but the airlines have been great in that they're pushing a lot for a wider representation within the community in the flight tech, and that's good. As somebody, I can't remember where the quote came from, it said, by not having as many women in senior roles and in the airline, it's actually pretty bad, because you're basically losing out on half of the thinking power out there. Imagine how much better the decisions could be if everyone was more involved. I hope that answers your question. So just looking at some of the questions that were asked previously. am I thinking of moving career to go and work for somebody else? Well, at the minute, I'm very happy where I am. I think the market is depressed, so and some moves, if you wanted them, are probably not that on really anyway. And I'm quite happy where I am, and there's great progression. You can go off to do various things. For example, you can go off once you've got the hours to become an SFI, sim instructor, and eventually you command, and so on and so forth. So yeah, no big rush at the moment. Guys, any more questions? Anyone new to the stream? Once again, thank you for coming online. And if you like the content, you like the page, please do sign up. You are making a huge effort with the videos. What are your aspirations for your channel, and what can we look forward to? Oh, James, you're an absolute trooper. Thank you. I guess I've wanted to get or to participate in the GA community and in the flight training community for quite a while. In fact, every time I speak to the guys at ANT, I keep mentioning that I want to, when time allows, look at maybe an FIC course or something like that. It's just really to give back. I mean, a lot of people helped me out during the process to get to all along the way, sharing information, sharing tips, and so on and so forth. So just try to share a little bit more. The inspiration for the channel, I'd love it to grow more. Just the better subscribed and the better liked the channel is, the easier it is to get content out there. So just basically get it as wide as possible, and hopefully just be a good resource and a good place that we can just share information relating to sort of flight training, early careers, jobs, what's good, what's working, what's not so, what people are finding, just all the way through the kind of life cycle of, if you like, pilot training. It wasn't that long that I was within the training organization, all over, and YouTube and social media and so on helped me a huge amount. Sometimes I may not necessarily have any question I need answering or so on, but after you've been, it's getting late and you've been studying for a long day and you're getting a bit fed up, and you just go on to Instagram, whoever, and you see somebody sat there in the A320, 737, whatever, having a great time. It spurs you on. It's just try to just give back a little bit on that one. Right, guys. I said I'll do the web stream for about 45 minutes. Coming up to that time. Anyone else got any questions they would like to ask just before I wrap up? In the meantime, yeah, just a massive thank you to everyone who's come on, everyone who's been supporting the channel. It means a lot, all the words of encouragement, all the messages. Thank you so much for that. If you're new on here, please do like and subscribe. It helps me out greatly. Well, guys, if there's no more questions on that, thank you so much. Stay safe. Have as good an Easter as you possibly can, and I'll be following more on with more content. I'll have this stream loaded on the channel, so if anyone wants to go back and listen to it as a podcast, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much, guys, and have a good evening and have a good weekend. Cheers.